everyone except Sandy and me.
Yep, you might have to come right back on. So, all right.
Okay, welcome. Jonathan, am I ready to go?
Do it, Sandy.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. This community input meeting number 2 follows our first meeting, which was November 4th, believe it or not, 2021. So in all that time, we've accomplished a great deal, and we are attempting to reach far and wide to bring in as many people as possible to give their input into this Lower Stony Run strategic plan. So tonight, I'm very pleased to introduce Tom McGilloway, who is our leader for the strategic plan, and go forth, Tom.
All right, thank you, Sandy. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. So tonight, so we have about a lot of information to share. It's about a 45-minute presentation, then we'll have about 45 minutes for questions and comments. I'm going to ask that we're going to go through the whole presentation first. We're not going to take questions during it unless you have a question that's a technical difficulty or you needed me to briefly repeat something. Just type that in the chat and Jonathan will let me know. But otherwise we want to get through because there might be some questions that you have and we just haven't gotten to that information yet. We will be posting this presentation on the website tomorrow. We'll also post the survey results on the website, and all the maps that we'll be sharing in this presentation will be posted on the website tomorrow. So you'll have a chance to look at things in detail. We have a lot of information to hit. So some of the slides I'll go through fairly quickly, and we're not going to zoom in on every detail of every map at this point. So I just wanted to let you know that they'll be posted on the website. So we're going to just, brief introduction, hit a summary of our input, go through some of our assessment, talk about some capital projects that we've submitted for some state bond funding for, and then other emerging ideas and next steps. On the emerging ideas, I just want to emphasize these are emerging, they're not baked. There's some options that we want to talk about, and this is where we want to get some input from you. We're also going to have some focus groups meetings following this that we could dive into it a little more. So as an introduction, you met Sandy, she's the chair. Amy Johansson is the president of Friends of Stony Run. Jonathan Dandoy, thank you, is running this Zoom meeting, and he'll be monitoring the raising the hands for chat and so forth. And then I'm with Mahan Reichel Associates here in Baltimore, and also online is Megan Oliver from Mahan Reichel. On the right is a list of the steering committee members. I'm not going to go through all the names right now, but tried to get as much representation from the surrounding community as possible, and also from city agencies. Acknowledge that this is an effort of Friends of Stony Run with our partners Johns Hopkins University and Baltimore City Rec and Parks. This is city property. Friends of Stony Run is funding a portion of this, and Johns Hopkins University has funded a portion of this as well. So we appreciate that funding. The purpose of the meeting tonight is just to give you an overview of our work done to date, talk about some of these emerging ideas, and then have some discussion about getting some input, and then we'll share next steps. And there's going to be many more opportunities for additional input, so this is not the last time. The plan purpose, if you're at the November meeting, it's really to build upon the framework that was established with the Upper Stony Run strategic plan that we completed in 2018. This is continuing that. So there'll be a lot of elements from that plan that carry over to this plan, and then there'll obviously be some new things in this plan that are directly related to the Lower Stony Run. So much of the Lower Stony Run plan is documenting and formalizing what is already happening and underway. There's been a lot of volunteer efforts, There's a lot of DPW projects or park and rec projects over the years that interface in the park. And so part of this is to get everything documented in one place and have a framework that all of the groups involved could be working from one document. As a strategic plan, it will identify some specific recommendations, but also a lot of recommendations where further, more detailed studies needed or where detailed design plans are needed. So this is not going to have all the detail and end all for every project, but it will set forth some recommendations for, especially for some things that need to be explored further. As all of us, I think on the call who use the Stony Run know that especially during COVID, the park's usage has really increased. And we've seen this in all of our park work around the region and throughout the country, just hearing reports of how usage has increased incredibly. And I think it demonstrates how valuable this is a resource for all of us. The study area you can see in light blue is the Upper Stony Run Strategic Plan that went from officially from Overhill Road north to Northern Parkway, but it encompassed down to University Parkway. The Lower Stony Run plan is from Overhill Road down to 29th Street and the connection over to Druid Hill Park. This is, as I mentioned the last meeting, this is really an honor for me to work on this. I live here, I work here, I play and volunteer in the Stony Run, and also play and volunteer in the Wyman Park Dell, and I've been doing that for the past 25 years. So this is great to be able to move this effort forward. The plan will ultimately have, it will be a report, it will have an assessment component, we'll have a series of recommendations, general and area specific, we'll have design guidelines, and then an implementation plan as well. Some schedule milestones. So everything in yellow, this is starting tonight with our outreach meeting number 2. Following this, we'll have a couple focus group discussions, a draft plan likely in April, community outreach number 3 in May. And so there'll still be some opportunity to provide input on the draft, and then looking in a final plan in June. Some of the upcoming opportunities for engagement. After tonight, we'll have the plans and this presentation posted online. Please, if you have any additional comments or thoughts that you want to add after looking at that, get them to us by March 24th. You can enter them in the comments section on the website. We'll organize some focus group discussions and then the outreach meeting in May. So some input summary. We had a variety of mechanisms for input. We had steering committee meetings, a website, the first public meetings, 2 site walks, the survey, tonight's meeting, and then ongoing input after tonight. So the input is really collecting a lot of this. And we've been hearing a lot of common themes in all those different formats and venues. Some of the themes, we have 600 written comments from the survey. We have pages and pages of notes from stakeholder meetings. So, organizing this into some themes that really bubble to the top, a lot of emphasis on being strategic about invasive plant removal, the importance of special use areas for community gathering, playgrounds for dogs, unique features in the park, bridges, ruins, wildlife, nature, and birds, the potential for environmental study. One that came across a lot was the sense of community, connecting us to each other, to our, I'm going to move my, to our dogs, to nature, etc. So all the community, whether it's a community group organized around the playground or the dog park, that sense of community is very important to people. Physical connections is another one that came across very strong, whether it's to the adjacent neighborhoods or to the Jones Falls and beyond. We heard a lot about accessibility, just more access points to the park, but also access to the water, and then also ADA, opportunities for ADA and handicap access. Heard a lot about walking path hazards, some challenges with the different efforts and volunteers being involved, some conflicts among different user groups, a lot on water quality, and then some unintended consequences from doing good. And what I mean by that is, there might, without a plan in place, sometimes removing invasives without having a plan to replace them with native plants, it just creates a bigger problem with more invasives coming in, or planting trees in an area that should be left open for a use area that's a popular gathering area. So there are good intentions, but often create some problems in and of themselves. And then the last thing, the importance of partners and partnerships. And we got a lot of great input of who potential partners are. And I really want to emphasize that one as much, because what the state that the Stony Run in now is really the result of a lot of partnerships. And a lot of that is volunteers, people in the community. We're really fortunate to have Hopkins students that you can see many photographs here from cleanup events over the years, tree planting events. Hopkins students, fraternities have been involved in quite a bit of that, as well as people within the community. I'm trying to talk about hit some of the highlights of the survey results. So we had, I think, 378 respondents, which was great. The first question was an open-ended question, so we just put together this Wordle to see what really jumped out, and you kind of see trails, trail, walking, park, dog, path. Those are some of the things that occurred over and over again as being really important. And then in some of that comes across in some of the more specific questions as we get into those as well. So just to hit some highlights on some demographics. Of the 378 people that responded to the survey, only one person that had never visited or does not visit the Stony Run. We had 600 written comments. We'll have these all online tomorrow if you want to look through everything. To the right is the neighbor, where people lived who took the survey. So about a quarter of the respondents in the Wyman Park neighborhood. The next highest was in Hamden, and then so forth. Down at the bottom, we had a question about since Hopkins is pretty much a big part of the east side of the Stony Run. Wanted to understand, how many from have relationships with Hopkins took the survey. So you could see that, quite about 33% of the respondents had some relationship to Hopkins, whether a student, faculty, employee, or some other affiliation. In avoidance, we only had 5 people that avoided the park or certain areas of the park, and some of the areas reasons identified were concerns for safety, crime-related concern regarding conflicts with other users, and complaints from others about unleashed dogs. Areas that have been intentionally avoided, a couple areas identified here, and then the field. Again, this was just 5 out of the 378 respondents that answered these questions, but we got more nuanced input in some of the others. For those that visited, the 300, and the numbers here vary, 375 to 373, because some people may not have answered the question, but most get there, and not surprisingly, by walking or running. The seasonal visitation, this is very interesting. It's pretty even throughout the year. So it's a resource that's used throughout the year, not just certain times. In terms of visitation patterns, most people visit alone, but it's actually not too far out. It's everywhere from 40 to 60%, whether it's with a pet, with friends, or with family. So there's quite a variety there. And then the visitation frequency, the highest percentage was several times a week, which is great. High percentage on daily, a high percentage on several times a month. So those are great numbers. It's a well-used park and amenity. And then some current condition perceptions of current maintenance. Most feel like it's well maintained or greater, or average or greater. And then I think this is really interested in some of the more detailed questions. This comes out to bear the desired balance of uses. Most feel that the current balance of active and passive uses is appropriate. Some would like to see more active uses, and some would like to see more passive uses, but most feel the balance is appropriate. Then some more detailed questions when we get into what times a day do you avoid the Stony Run, and then what times a day do you typically visit the Stony Run. So we only had a small percentage that said avoided, so that's in yellow, and you can see that here. So I want to focus on those that do visit the Stony Run. On weekdays, evening, early afternoon, and lunch were the highest. On the weekends, the morning, early afternoon were the highest, and the evening is a little lower. So it kind of makes sense on the weekdays. At evenings, people are at work all day coming home, they're using the park then. That makes sense. The morning, we have the good bit that use the morning, early morning and morning, and all that. So it gets good usage throughout the day, with the exception of late night, after hours. And then this question combines two questions. What section of the Stony Run do you currently or typically visit? And this we could answer multiple items, and that's in the light gray. And then the one where you could answer one answer, what section do you visit most often? That's in the darker gray. So, and we see this consistent in a lot of answers. The walking path is the most highest visitation, then the lower intramural field at JHU, the entire Stony Run corridor, woodland paths, and then individual spaces throughout the park. So again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. You'll see this if you want to look at the survey results online. What activities have you participated in? The most is walking, nature appreciation, relaxation, leisure, on-leash dog walking, running, jogging, passing through the park, birding, off-leash dog walking and play, playground, and picnicking. They were the highest uses, and then on down, you can see some of these other more specific uses. So there's a good variety of usage, but the walking, the pathways, and the trails is a reoccurring theme throughout this. In this question, what things do you appreciate most about the Stony Run? Again, the walking path, the wildlife, the environment around the valley, the connectivity, accessibility, feel safe to let dogs off leash, sense of community, a variety of passive open spaces, side paths and mountain bike paths, playgrounds, and so forth. And then what are your highest priorities? Again, maintaining, improving walkways, removing invasive vegetation, water quality, repairing degraded sections of the stream. This is one that you could answer multiple choices. And then for this one, which is what is your top priority, maintaining, improving pathways, again, removing invasives, providing a designated off-leash dog area, improving water quality, adding amenities, and so forth down the list. So, I think the pathways and walking again really occurred throughout this survey. And then this is looking at those two questions combined. So for the most part, they follow the same alignment, but you do see some differences where you had to pick one priority. You see some differences in, like this one, and some of the others. But the darker identifies the clear top priorities. And then, and I already went through this, thoughts on the current condition, the maintenance, and the desired balance of uses. So, and then we had, like I said, we had 600 written comments, most, I'd say, very thoughtful comments, and a good variety and range. It gave people a chance to elaborate, on what you couldn't on a multiple choice answer. These are a couple quotes that I thought were interesting. It's unique to have an urban trail that feels wild and feels distant from the adjacent residential neighborhood without feeling unsafe or lonely, and then preserve wilderness while making it accessible to people, dogs, and kids. And one of the reasons this wilderness place, you can feel safe in it is because there is other activity happening. There's a lot of activity happening, a lot of people using it, so you're not necessarily isolated. And then I really love this one comment, don't overthink it, it is awesome. And so we do have to, part of the master plan or strategic plan, the purpose is not just about doing things, but it's also about documenting so that the wrong things don't happen or some mistakes don't happen along the way, that you can keep things and preserve what's important and enhance what's important. So on the assessment, we looked, I'm going to go through a series of maps. We looked at a number of things. We compiled a base map, and this combines GIS information that we had. It combines the construction drawings from the lower Stony Run stream restoration, and it combines some site observations that we made. So we compiled this all in one place. So it's a fairly detailed map that groups can use as planning efforts and projects move forward, because no one map had everything in one place. So throughout tonight, we divide the map into 3 sections: the northern segment that goes from University Parkway just to down to about 36th Street, the central segment that goes from about 37th Street down to Lyman Park Drive Bridge, and then the south segment that goes from 33rd Street to the Jones Falls. So we have these different segments. There's some overlap in them for context, but this is how we'll be going through this information. This might be interesting for some, that this is actually an Olmsted Brothers. It's an unrealized plan for Wyman Park. It's developed, I think, in 1911, 1915. But it shows north is to the left, but it shows Wyman Park Dell, and the idea of connecting these 2 park spaces around the Homeward campus area. You see the old Mampaw Railroad run through here, and then some things, road configurations are correct, and some were never realized there. So we took that same plan and we dropped it into our base map, so you can compare the current conditions that you see here. Where these buildings here on the Hopkins campus, that was like an old quarry right there in that location. So there's some interesting things. You see the old Huntington Avenue streetcar viaduct along here. There's now some interpretive signage in this location for that. So that might be fun for some of you to look through online. We looked at the floodplain. There's a 100-year floodplain and a floodway. We've seen a couple sources of information that showed it's slightly different. This is from the city's GIS information. The upper section, the central section. Obviously, in the central and lower section where the valley's steep and narrow, you're going to have a narrower floodplain. But the photo to the left, this is prior to the lower Stony Run stream restoration. You can see all the silt on the leaves of the tree. This was right after a flood. This was the height of the water. I mean, that might have been 30 feet high at that point. This is looking off the Wyman Park Bridge in this area. Because tree branches got clogged the culvert invert, the water would get to this level of depth. This is probably 40 feet deep in this area. Right here, it turned into a lake because it couldn't get through the culvert. This is that same area. Again, you see the silt. This was the flood elevation. This is the path that's up on top of the hill above the stream. So that's where these were all prior to the lower Stony Run stream restoration. That was part of the reason for the stream restoration. And when we talk about one of the projects down at the culvert, this will give this a little context later on. The path network, as we heard from the survey and from our site walks, walking and the pathways are probably the most important thing about the Stony Run. And so this map on the right designates the paths. In red is the main walking path highlighted, and the yellow highlight there. We have some connecting paths. The green represent all the unpaved and dirt paths. Some are in the hillside through the woods, some are along the street edges. And then we have that for the central section as well. Some interesting conditions along Beach Avenue here, where you have this double pathway condition. But we also included in this that wonderful boardwalk through the trees that Hopkins built along San Martin Drive, because it's really possible to do a whole loop. There's many variety of ways you can experience this Stony Run stream valley. One of the most exciting, especially during COVID, was some of these trails, these offshoots of the main walking path that go through the woods and on the hillsides. A lot of these are being maintained by mountain bikers, and they're actually being constructed in a sustainable way with fallen tree branches and working with the topography in many cases. So, but these allow us to experience the trail in different ways. And then we have some paved trails. We also have these connections that this is the work of Nellie Powers, who lives in this house, who got a grant, on her own. She spearheaded this grant to make that trail connection at Huntington Avenue, where the old viaduct went through. So we have a lot of different, one of the things we heard a lot about was, just improving some access points to the park and to the water itself. This next set of slides is open spaces and activity spaces. And while much of the corridor is wooded, some of the areas where people experience this, especially in more of a community building way, are these open spaces. These are all highlighted in green here in the upper section. Up here at Overhill, we have portions of Linkwood Park that are open spaces and informal gathering spots for the community. We have them along, this is the lower fields, the intramural fields at Hawkins, along Tudor Arms. We have the plateau at Tudor Arms, the ball field at 37th Street. We have, again, the lower intramural fields used a lot for the dog walking. The sledding is a popular area for the rare times we get a decent snow. And then obviously the pathway connection goes through there as well. The plateau at Tudor Arms has a lot of community use for the Wyoming Park community, gathering spaces. Over the years, this is from several years ago, we just see, these wonderful random things set up, these aerial lists set up in the park. And then during COVID, something I had not seen before is these informal gatherings. Would see, family picnics out in this, under this tree grove, and things that we didn't see as much before COVID. At the ball fields at 37th Street, we see some activity there. Don't see a whole lot of organized games there, but we do see that. And then, of course, the playgrounds. This is at 34th Street, become very important gathering spaces. And then as we move to the south section, we have the kind of the most active rec part of the park, the 2 ball diamonds and soccer field at the lower end, gets a lot of programmed use. And then probably one of the most wonderful spaces here, we call it the Glade. It's not really apparent from the street. You go up a hill and then back down, but that's this space here. It's really been well used by the residents along Keswick, and it's just a magical space through there. And then another wonderful space is over at Huntington Avenue and the playground that's used by the Greenmount School, the church that's here, and the community, and the open gathering area in that location. And though that was pointed out in a lot of our stakeholder meetings and the tours, is a very important community space. We do have some issues with parking when there's big ball games over here. So I think part of what we're going to look at, what are some opportunities for parking, utilizing the Boy Scout parking and having better connections and signage to that parking resource across Sisson Street for big events there. We also have a lot of wonderful features along the Stony Run. These are old mill ruin walls and mill ruins along Wyoming Park Drive, this amazing curved wall. This is a wall, it's actually covered in ivy, and one just simple project might be to clear that of ivy so you could see that beautiful stonework from Wyoming Park Drive. The boardwalk through the trees at Hawkins allows you to appreciate this wonderful stone bridge of San Martin Drive that you really could never notice before, because on the road you really didn't see that beautiful stonework. We also have history to interpret. This is part of the Nellie Powers project that she did with grant money to interpret the Huntington Avenue viaduct at Huntington Avenue. And then we have these wonderful features with the overpass, the bridge, the University and the Wyoming Park Drive are these wonderful arched bridges. Even the bridge at Remington Avenue, the stone walls there, it's a wonderful space there. And at Wyoming Park Drive, this was several years ago on the right. It was used for concerts, and I think it came out of the kind of the Jones Falls Watershed Association to bring attention to these stream valleys. What would happen was the band would set up on the one side, and then the audience would set up on the other side, and there was just amazing acoustics under there. And I think there were maybe 3 or 4 concerts, and it was all part of calling attention to this stream valley. The band members did not like trudging down this hill with their equipment, but they were some great events. And it's possible to develop some events like that again in the future. And then there's just these wonderful things. On my walk the other day along the park, I stumbled across this. It's just pretty amazing things of how people have kind of treasured this space and what they do with it. So it's just this little wonderful find that you come across. The other thing, related to these open spaces is the perimeter. And, we got some comments in the survey, and then over the years, comments about people saying, oh, I didn't know that was an official park, or I never felt safe going there, or I didn't know there were paths down there. A lot of that is, some of the edge conditions, the woodlands come right up to the street. That has a certain character that's demonstrated by this kind of squiggly line here, tree line. And then in other areas, you have a more of a park-like image along the street with these open spaces. And so it's not saying one or the other is wrong, but that's kind of what adds some of the magic to this space. It has both worlds that nature comes right up into the neighborhood, but then we also have these park spaces. So we'd want to, just as we continue to do tree planting and things like that, be conscious of those edge conditions, and as improvements or enhancements are made to the park, what can we do to accentuate those qualities, accentuate the woodland edge, and then also accentuate some of these open spaces. And then you could just see the different conditions, along Wyman Park Drive. On one side, you have this glimpse into this very park-like setting, and then on the left side, you have that woodlands that comes right up into the street. So it really captures the whole essence of the Stony Run. Planting areas, we've documented all of the planting, in purple or some significant invasive stands. In light green are some areas where invasive removal projects have been going on. James Wolf, I don't know if he's on the call, but he's been really instrumental in organizing a lot of invasive removal projects, and then where invasives are removed, going in and planting natives. Over probably the past 15 years, with Hopkins students, community members, friends of Stony Run, probably planted well over 100 to 200 trees in the whole corridor. They're identified by these darker areas, and you can see, in this case, for example, they're more street trees. Some of these other areas are more woodland trees, accentuating the woodlands. And we have these wonderful stands of oaks, in the midsection near 37th Street. They're nearing the end of their lives. So how do we replace elements like this? And we're getting trees in place to take over when they are lost. We have areas of very healthy forests, like these beach stands of beech over in the Hopkins campus. We have some areas that aren't very healthy. This was, along the slope just off of Beach Avenue, where, when the railroad was built and, the Jones Falls was built, a lot of rubble was just thrown over the hill here. And so we have a lot of not great tree material growing out of there. So we want to be aware of that. And then we have tree planting projects. And what Friends of Stony Run has been trying to do is, work with groups. There's a group several years ago near the playground at 33rd Street that wanted to get shade around the playground. So Friends of Stony Run worked with them in coordinating tree planting, and it was just great. And so those efforts have happened all over. Most recently down in this area along Sisson Street was a major project by the Flowering Tree Trail group and Greenmount School. Also, it's important to note, this is from the Homewood Sustainability Map, that the woodlands all on the Hopkins side, this is all in a protected forest conservation easement. This isn't the exact easement marking, but it's pretty much all of that woodland along San Martin Drive down to the Stony Run is in a protected forest conservation easement. Some other things, stream repair. We had, even though there's been stream restoration, there are some areas up along Linkwood Road where you can see some degradation of the stream channel. This is the lower Stony Run when the stream restoration, I don't know, that might have been 12 years ago or something by now. This is when it first went in. A lot of this has been degraded. We know that DPW has a planned project to make repairs here. That might be a year or so out. The important thing about documenting that is we just want to make sure that we're coordinating with them on this effort, and there might be other opportunities. With that project, there might be some opportunity to do some other things in the park. We have a lot of areas of erosion, gullies. They're marked by these. This is a severe one down right in this area. It's not, oh, yeah, right here. It's not showing up in this map, but a gully going down to the stream. So those are things that we want to address. This culvert under Remington Avenue, DOT, this is a planned replacement. They have to enlarge that culvert. So I forget what the schedule is. I think it's in the next year or so. They'll be replacing that. Originally, they were going to, Remington Avenue is going to be out of commission for 2 years because they were going to surface cut it. My understanding now is that they're not going to surface cut it. They're going to take care of it without going in from the top. So Remington Avenue will still be open as they replace that. But we think, ideally there'd be an opportunity to reuse some of this stone in how that's reconstructed. And then we know there's some stream repair needed where the stream goes into the culvert down at the lower end. And there's a plan, the maintenance road for DTW to access that area. So that was a lot of kind of some assessment highlights. I want to get into some of the recommendations at this point. So this is the vision statement from the Upper Stony Run Strategic Plan. We think it's still relevant. It hits on all of the items that came across in our input so far: an urban oasis, ecologically protected, welcoming to people of all backgrounds, interests, and ages, connecting North Baltimore, welcoming visitors, friendly meeting ground, primarily passive recreation and neighborhood events. So we think this is still relevant, but if you have comments, if there's things that you think are missing on this that we need to consider, please let us know. I also want to, tonight, we have limited time tonight, so we're not going to go through all the details. There are a lot of general recommendations in the Upper Stony Run Plan that are still relevant here, like water quality testing, the stream bank repair, bird boxes and wildlife habitats, signage, site amenities, and so forth. So we're not going to get into a lot of these details tonight. So I just have this slide up because I want you to know that, if we're not talking about it tonight, it doesn't mean we're not thinking about it, because we know a lot of comments on the survey and in some of our tours dealt with some of these subject matters. A really important progress has been made in the capital projects. At the November meeting, we identified 5 capital projects that we were submitting to the state for the state bond funding. Sandy Sparks has been instrumental in that. And this is really, these are all projects related to completion of the walking path, dealing with connectivity and accessibility. And it's really, it's really heartening to see the survey results, because with the emphasis on connections and pathways and accessibility, that really supports that these are important projects. The 5 of them are identified here. I'll give a real quick highlight. This is the Linkwood Road connection of the Stony Run, looking at getting a marked pathway along this side of the roadway, eliminating the parking along this side. This has been a project of the Streets Committee of the Tuscany Canterbury Association. So we've been folding this into our effort. So this has been an ongoing effort of that community association. We also have the Craycombe entrance at Tudor Arms and the what we're calling JHU access, the bridge crossing and the eroded pathway up the hillside at Craycombe. And the plans that we're showing here aren't final designs. We just developed these so that we could get some cost estimates and put in the submission package for the bond bill. But the nutshell is to, one, most importantly, get a gate here. And we just got an email yesterday. Someone reported that people drove down in the Dell. We've had people in the past driving down late at night, partying, doing donuts on the field. So we want to get a gate in here. This surface has to stay in place until DPW's finished with some of the restoration work. But once that's finished, we can get a better surface in here that's more friendly. Need to have a pull-in spot for like mulch delivery for tree projects and pathways, get maybe a better crosswalk along here. Down at the bottom of the hill, the bridge, replacing the bridge across the abutments, looking at maybe a path, a little bit of a switchback so that that does have some accessibility to it. You can get across so that we could have ADA accessibility across the bridge. I'm not going to go up the hill, but at least be able to interact with the stream and the bridge. And then looking at how that hillside path could be developed with railroad ties and some stone dust to control some of the erosion. This is the bridge in the current condition. This would be a replacement bridge for that. And then the project at the south end, a DPW access drive. We're showing this wider than at the time we did this. We hadn't had our conversation with DPW. We just had a meeting with them. They just need a 10-foot access road to get equipment down here so that they can remove the debris that builds up at the culvert. That's extremely important. What we want to do is work with them so that we could get a pathway connection that works as a path connection to link the Stony Run Walking Path up to Wyman Park Drive and over to the Jones Falls Trail. You can see that's this dashed area. This is where the access road would be. It's a dashed area. It's a missing link between the Jones Falls Trail and the Stony Run Walking Path. And then this was prior to the stream restoration. This is one of our cleanups with the Hopkins students. You could see the extent of the debris buildup, and DPW is not able to get down there and access that to remove that. So it's very vitally important that they can get in there, and as logs build up, that they can remove them before it gets to this extreme level. And then, as I said earlier, we'll have a connectivity between the Jones Falls Trail and the Stony Run Walking Path. The last capital project is signage. We've already implemented one with some grant money. We've implemented some from grant money in the Wyman Park Dell. This could be similar to what we do at different points of the Stony Run. But again, it's to formalize the park, give people, and you know that there's access to the trail that is a walking path and so forth. There's also opportunities for interpretive signage, environmental interpretation, as well as cultural. So the ideas that we're thinking through now that we want to share tonight are relating to some different things. Again, the plan will have much more than this, but we want to talk about walking path stabilization, accessibility, invasive removal and planting, potential off-leash areas. There's a lease agreement that I'll talk about, a potential update to that, and then some long-term opportunities to monitor. So, we heard over and over again in the survey and on the site walks, and as I tripped on the site walk, it was a good visual demonstration of the need to, stabilize the pathway. This is very important to folks. So whether it's roots, there's a lot of signposts sticking up, wood stakes from the stream restoration sticking up. So these are projects that Boy Scouts can do, others can do. But we know that it's really a priority with folks, so that guidance has been very helpful. Accessibility, this is another thing. There's parts of the trail that are accessible. The bridges are accessible. At the bottom of the ramp, the step needs to be adjusted so that people can ramp. A good section of the path through the intramural fields is accessible. It's not paved, but it's level and wide, that you could get a wheelchair through there or someone with mobility issues. And then the north of the bridges, there's a lot of accessibility too. But as we move south, we lose that opportunity. This is the walking path right where the ponds are, between the two ponds. There's a steep dip in the path. Originally in the stream restoration plans, there was a bridge there. That bridge was never provided. You really want to work with DPW to get that bridge in there, because otherwise that's a barrier for people. And then really when you get just beyond this and you start to go up the hill towards 36th Street, this is one of the few areas that you could feasibly get from the upper areas to the lower area with you'll still need a switchback, but it could be a relatively minor switchback to get the 5% grade for ADA accessibility. So what we're looking at is that if we could get a switchback in there and a bridge in that pond, you could essentially make from 36th Street through here on up to Linkwood Park ADA accessible. And the point is that, the idea is that, give everyone the opportunity to experience some of the great things of the park. We can't make it all accessible, but we should be able to make some parts accessible. And the next level is, are there opportunities to get sidewalks along the park side of the street frontage, maybe some loops, paved loops in some of those gathering areas I talked about, so people with mobility issues can get into and experience the park as well. Switchback, just some examples, down below at the right is one. This is the Jones Falls Trail on the left. This was, I was on here for the first time a couple of weeks ago. This is the Jones Falls Trail in Mount Washington. So if there's trying to get a ramp through a wooded area, this is a great example of how that could be done without encroaching on the tree cover or doing extensive grading. Along the park edges, along Linkwood Road, along Tudor Arms and Beach Avenue, we just have a dirt path. We don't have any ramps. And so someone in a wheelchair, someone with accessible issues really can't experience the park along the road edge. So this is something we want to get some input on. Are there opportunities, maybe not along all of these edges, but in some of the edges, to provide some sidewalk, and whether it's paving or permeable paving, explore different options, but something that would be accessible. And then if we look at the central and lower section of Stony Run, just how some of those opportunities could work. This is 36th Street leading down to the main part of the walking path. These are along the street edges where you could get an accessible walkway. And then some of those loops that we talked about, even if there could be a loop path around the sports fields at the lower end of the park, joining the Stony Run, and as well as the Jones Falls Trail. Just some examples. This is a Stream Valley Park in Greenville, South Carolina, very natural riparian area that's being restored along the stream, but then some of the use areas that are adjacent to neighborhoods and public areas, you could see these accessible loops or paths. This is a lot more intensive than what we have at the Stony Run, but it illustrates the concept. We see that concept at the Lyman Park Dell. A lot of people don't go down into the Dell, but they really use this playground area, and there's a accessible pathway system that they could get there and access this area. And then our other parks in the city have some sort of pathway network that get you into these spaces. And we recognize that most of the park, Stony Run, needs to be the natural surface and wild trails. So this is primarily looking at opportunities for some of those use areas. And even if we go back to the historic plan, that was some of the early intent, to have some pathways and more park-like spaces that can be accessible to that. We're not suggesting trying to recreate a plan that was never developed, but just showing that, some of the thinking early on related to that. Invasive plant removal and planting, that's really an ongoing effort. As I said, James and others over the past 15 years, we've been leading efforts for tree planting. I showed these diagrams earlier of the open spaces, and then you can see the tree planting space. And so what we've been trying to do is reinforce some of these edges with new planting, so that we're not filling the space, we're protecting that. And over the years, we've actually had groups that, again, good intentions, but wanting to come in and they wanted to reforest this whole area. And we steered them towards reinforcing the edges, replacing invasives in the woodlands with native trees, but really protecting that open area, because these are important parts of the park and the environment. And those woodland edges also provide important habitat for animals that aren't going to be in a deep forest habitat. Dog park opportunities. We heard a lot of comments about dog usage, the importance of it, the sense of community. We know that having off-leash areas for dogs in urban areas it's important for livability. It's important for wanting to attract and retain city residents. We also know that keeping children, families, and individuals in the city is important as well. And so, sometimes we have conflicts between these user groups. So we want to look at, start to explore some opportunities for some solutions here and some ideas. One of the things, the strategic plan, we're not going to solve this particular issue because the timeline for getting something like this developed and complete is going to be a lot longer than what the strategic plan is. But what we can do is identify some of the approaches and areas that can be explored in more detail at a future time, identify some of the considerations that should be considered for each of the unique areas. Different areas might have different needs or issues or requirements. We do want to have a focus group discussion on this. We imagine there'll be a lot of questions or comments on this. We're not going to be able to get to it all tonight, but we do want to set up a focus group for March and April. If you want to be a part of that, would love you to put your name, contact information in the chat, or put it on the email in the on the project website. We'll also want to make sure tie this into Councilwoman Ramos's effort that she's been leading on this as well. But just as we get some more background, there are current city policies from 2010. If you Google this, you can find it online. And the city does identify fenced dog runs and off-leash dog areas to be considered. And then they have a bunch of criteria for each of these that are identified in a process to get these implemented. So these regulations may need to be updated, and so there need to be some partnership with the city to update those. Some other things that we need to take into consideration, there's a 99-year lease on, this is Tudor Arms, Craycombe, the Lower Field, University Parkway. So this is the area of the lease that was from 1986. That's in a lease agreement between Recreation and Parks, the city, Johns Hopkins University, and the Wyoming Park Community Association. It's a 99-year lease. It was developed back in the day. The park was an entirely different place then, did not get a lot of usage. There was a lot of, kind of bad activities happening there. My understanding was, Hopkins was considering building a building here, community. I think Sandy was involved in that, got involved to protect the park. And so this agreement came to be to allow intramural sports use here in this field. And then Hopkins would build a building on their on-campus site where the intramural field was. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's in a nutshell. So all these things we have to take into consideration. So really, when we look at the options for dog parks, one option is, and I'm not suggesting this is the right option, is the status quo. The city doesn't have resources to regularly enforce and regularly enforce the leash laws. And so we need to recognize if we do the status quo, enforcement will be sporadic, it will be perceived as unfair, and it will just annoy a lot of people. It will frustrate people that want more enforcement, and then it will frustrate people that get spot fines every 5 years, and there's no consistency. And so this really depends on self-enforcement regulation, and that's most effective if it's coming from within the dog owner community. If there's dissatisfaction with the policies, then it really needs to be, or the lack of enforcement, really needs to be a political approach. People need to lobby for stronger, more consistent enforcement, or if there's a desire for changes in the policies, lobby for that. But that can't be solved in a strategic plan like this. It needs to be looked at citywide. In the meantime, though, one consideration might be, are there some fenced no dog zones? So there might be playground areas, not just the playground itself, but a playground and area around that could be fenced, so people and children can play in those areas and not have dogs. It keeps the dogs out. Another opportunity is, whatever happens, we need to post the policies in visible locations. Challenge with this, continued ongoing conflicts and frustrations with the status quo. The other option is a fenced dog park. Currently, the city's reg, they define a fenced dog run, which is more like what you have at Patterson Park or Latrobe Park. The area has to be able to be hosed off. They call for natural turf and paving. It's a much more urban dog park than what you see here in this picture, like a fenced grass area. So we need to work with Rec and Parks to update some of those policies and regulations. We could determine, are there one or multiple areas for these? And in some cases, we might need to recognize we'd have to sacrifice some other park uses or flexibility in order to have one of these. Ideally, these should be an acre, but a half-acre minimum. And then the third option is off-leash areas and hours. And the city does have the option for an off-leash area that's unfenced. There's a lot of criteria to follow for that. So work with the city and the policies, determine what the time periods are. Is it morning and evening? Follow the process that the city has. It's important that the hours and areas are clearly posted. This is an example of Prospect Park in Brooklyn. In their case, their hours are 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. that they're off leash in those areas only, the green areas only. And other times of days you have to be on leash. They have much better enforcement though than we have here. And then those, in a perfect world with this system, those uncomfortable with the dogs can know that they can avoid these areas at these times. And there's probably some other solutions that we didn't capture there, but we'd love to hear some other ideas if they're out there. It might be a combination of elements from each of those approaches. But when we start to look at some potential areas, we looked at, this is the upper section. All the areas highlighted in green are potential areas. Area A, right here below University Bridge, there's actually along the wood line, there's a large area of invasive shrubs that have encroached in there. So if you clear those out and go up to the base of the hill, you have about a half acre here. This area, it's kind of secluded. It's already near the existing de facto dog park. And it's, has that sense of seclusion that's nice about there. It's along the trail. This could be fenced or it could be an off-leash hour area. It could be, since we know there's stream repairs happening in there, that could be coordinated with that effort to go there. There may be some floodplain area here, and we know the city doesn't want to have the dog park in the floodplain, but there may be some encroachment of floodplain in this area. Some other areas, the Hopkins, from what we saw, some mapping, the sports field area, the size was in this area C. So there could be the northern portion of that, could be a fenced dog park. And then this area D along here could be a long linear dog run and gathering area here. And I'll show some photos of what that looks like in a little bit. That's this area here where there's actually, it looks like it's all wooded. It's a low protected area. There could be some clearing of that, keep the trees, but clear some of the brush. That could be a low linear, it has the berm on the one side, and then you have more of an open gathering here. So this is up above the rec field. So this could potentially be a fenced area. Or, all of these areas, A, B, and C could be an off-leash, unfenced area, but you could fence and protect the sports field. So the fence could keep dogs out, but allow people in the community in to use it for non-dog related activities. And then dogs could have off-leash areas around here, or you could have a fenced sports field here and a fenced dog park in one of these areas. So there can be different combinations to explore. And then some other areas, the plateau at Tudor Arms. We know this area is heavily used by the community for events. You could get a half acre at the back end of that, still allow access around the perimeter of it, but still allow more of a community gathering area in front. Area F is the ball field area that would require decommissioning that ball field for a dog park. And then this starts to get close to some of the residences along there. But these are some potential options. This is the Tudor Arms Plateau. And then this is, if you can imagine, the back half of that as a fenced dog park. This is an example from Rock Creek Parkway in DC. I don't know if that's a dog park back there, You can see the fence here. So there's a way that, it can be visually unobtrusive to have that activity in the back, but still keep the front section preserved as more of an open community park space. And then the other area is area G by the Linkwood Bridge. This is a much smaller area. That's a challenge. It's only 0.3 acres. So there's some challenges with that location. As we move to the south, looking at the 33rd Street playground area, there could be about a half-acre fenced dog park put in this area. It could be configured differently as well. And then also I talked about potential fence no dog zones. For example, at the playground at 34th Street, you could have an area that's fenced, an ornamental fence that kind of protects the playground and some green area from the dogs. And similarly, you could do that over at the Huntington Avenue playground in that open space area. So again, those are just some, looking at some opportunities that, we looked at what works in terms of physical space. But obviously there's a lot of factors that need to be considered with each of those areas, different partners. The city's guidelines for dog parks require a public process to go through that. So again, we're not going to solve this with the strategic plan, but what we'd like to do is, in some of these areas, identify that if these are areas being considered, these are the important considerations that should be thought of if you consider these. And then the other thing we look at, I showed earlier the lease between the city, Wyoming Park Community Association, and Hopkins. With this process, there may be an opportunity to have a recommendation that the lease agreement is updated. Right now, no fencing is allowed to be built in this area per the lease. So whether that's for sports fields or dog parks. So that would, if there's a fence for a dog park, the lease agreement would have to be updated. And then there's a lot of other factors. And, the park is a very different place than it was in 1986. So this might be a great opportunity for all parties to get together and update that. Again, that couldn't be solved as part of this strategic plan, but the strategic plan could make that a recommendation. And then the last thing I want to get into is some long-term opportunities. At the southern end of the park at 29th Street and Sisson, this is where the park really interfaces with some, you have fast food restaurants, the DPW facility, Potts and Callahan. So it really kind of loses its structure, and we lost its connection with the Jones Falls. If we look at the map here, this is where the stream goes underground. This dash line is where, approximately the historic alignment of the stream was before being culverted. This is the Boy Scouts, the Waste, DPW, and Potts and Callahan. So what we want to say in the strategic plan, we want to start to address that if anything, if changes occur here, if Boy Scouts leaves, if a DPW waste facility leaves, which I believe it is, if something happens with Potts and Callahan, put some guiding framework that, what are some opportunities with any change, whatever that change might be for the plan. So how can those changes reinforce and improve connections between the Stony Run and the Jones Falls, connections with Remington, pedestrian safety and traffic calming, more activation and programming of the park spaces, and then how can changes influence the environmental health and hydraulic function of Stony Run and the Jones Falls. So, we can start to plant the seed in this plan for long-term consideration as uses change. We did get a couple comments in the survey and on some of the site tours about what about, daylighting this section of the stream. And, a lot of streams in urban areas have been daylighted. They're usually in a condition where you weren't in such a steep valley situation. So if you were to daylight this section of the stream, you would have to grade pretty far back to have the valley walls. You can see the grading, the contour lines in this area. So you'd really impact a large area. You'd have to create some bridges through here and everything. So it's not to say it couldn't be done or it shouldn't be done. We're not going to solve here. There'd have to be a lot of study as to what the pros and cons of that would be. But I think that could fall in the category of, what are some of these opportunities that we can start to identify long-term if changes occur in those properties. And then again, the plan will cover a lot of these things that I didn't talk about tonight specifically. So I blathered on really a lot longer than I thought. The next steps, again, between March 8th and the 24th, feel free to comment on this presentation. The survey will be posted on the website. We'll try to organize some focus group discussions. We know we want to have one with the Johns Hopkins students. Anand is on our steering committee is organizing that. And then we'd like to have one with the dog, the leash, off leash discussion, tie that in with some of Councilwoman Ramos's work, and then another outreach meeting in May. So with that, I'll stop blathering. Want to open it up for comments and questions.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. All right, everybody. So we're going to try to get everybody the chance to ask their questions. What I'm going to do first is read through some of the questions, Tom, that were posted in the chat, because people might have those as well. First one here, and if you have more questions, please put them in the chat or raise your hand with the emoji and we'll try to get to everybody. Thanks. Luke, we can do that in a second. Matthew asked, and I think a lot of people did, they'd like to know more about the focus groups, right? How will that discussion be developed? How will folks be recruited? Who will moderate? And what that all is going to look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. This idea of the focus groups really just came up recently as a comment, so we don't have that worked out yet. So we need to work that out and post it on the website. Yeah, we'd love to have some in-person meetings. Again, it would be the facility. It would be for the purpose of this strategic plan, understanding, some of the areas that we talked about, maybe some areas that we didn't talk about. What are the important issues to just consider? The purpose would not be to solve the issue, because that's really going to be an ongoing process well beyond the scope of this plan. So we will get the details of that and we'll post that on the website. But in the meantime, if you have interest in participating, if you even have suggestions for it, please include them in some comments on the website.
We had a couple folks ask about availability of the recording and slides and all of that. I believe the intent is all of that is going to be available tomorrow and the days immediately following this.
That's correct.
Yep. Okay, great. Will there be, or is there an assessment of trees in the park after they are planted to evaluate their condition? Or I don't know if that's related to this project or just the city in general, right?
No, I mean, not really in a sense, but as someone who's planted a lot of those trees, those of us that are involved in tree planting, we assess them in terms of where, for about 2 years, we're watering them through the summer. We have a whole watering brigade set up, so we're keeping track of the ones that are surviving. Most of the ones we planted have survived quite well. So they're the trees that volunteers have planted. I know some of the planting that was done as part of the stream restoration. Craig Huntley, James Wolfe, and others have been working with DPW and reporting things that haven't been successful or haven't developed the way they should be. So there's assessment in that regard. But when we go to the effort as volunteers to plant trees, we want to make sure they live. So we have a good brigade of volunteers watering those and making sure they stay alive. Great. And last year we had cicada netting protectors. So yes.
Just to follow up on the focus groups, it was suggested to call them in-person meetings and not focus groups. But that was an idea. But it sounds like Matthew, I mean, you're on the chat. It sounds like you would be volunteering to help participate in that process of developing the focus groups or in-person meetings. Yep. So
yeah, that would be great. Yeah, we can work through that. And focus groups is the word used by the people suggesting it. So, but we can. We want to make sure it's we're conveying the right information as to what those groups are. So.
Yep. And Tom, you probably weren't able to see this, but a few folks asked about the construction happening at the southern end by the ball fields and the culvert. Odette Ramos was able to chime in that this was a continuation of the stream restoration that was on hold before. They will be finishing the restoration, moving the stream near the culvert and preparing for repairs. So
and I don't know.
Amy, also I see your hand. I'm not ignoring you. Yep.
I'm sorry, did you just call on someone else?
No, I was just reading through the chat there. And Councilwoman Ramos, I don't know if you wanted to answer that question. I think because Tom, I think you maybe didn't know that, right?
Yeah, I know we had a meeting with DPW, and we know they were about to get started because they had some work to finish up. And if Councilwoman Ramos wants to respond, that would be great.
Sorry, can you repeat the question again? My apologies.
That's okay. This was just follow up to the questions about the current construction happening at the southern end of the Stony Run by the ball fields. And yeah, yep. Uh-oh, did you get muted again? I think you might have been muted again. Uh-oh.
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're starting the work on continuing the stream restoration and the invasive species removal, and the I think they're also working on, they're going to put an access road to be able to get Rec and Parks to come down and clean out the culvert when it gets when trees and stuff get in there. So this has been a lot of work. You mentioned James Wolf earlier. He's been involved with this and really suggested that we put together meetings every month with DPW and Rec and Parks to make sure this keeps going, and we've been doing that. So they're also supposed to be doing more plantings, and so they're continuing that work that they stopped a couple of years ago, because they needed a new contract, and everything pretty much stopped during COVID. So that's what that work is.
Okay, thank you. Tom, good, keep going.
Yep.
Okay, great. This is a good one, more of a comment, but I don't think we've heard this before. Would more garbage cans be considered along the length of the park? And I think in all of our sessions, we've never mentioned that. So that's a great comment, Julie.
That is a great comment. And actually, that came up a lot in the Upper Stony Run strategic plan. And as I understand, and I believe this is still the case, trash cans along the park edges at the street, they're the responsibility of DPW. They take care of them. Trash cans in a park are Park and Rec responsibility. So in the Upper Stony Run plan, we identified areas where for some additional trash cans, and we would be doing the same for the Lower Stony Run. There's always a challenge with the trash can, because over the years, and just even, in the Wyman Park neighborhood, the 25 years I've lived here, there's been requests for trash cans. And then what happens a lot of times, people dump all their trash in their bags next to the trash can. And then people in the community request that the trash cans are removed, so you don't have that dumping problem. So it's kind of a catch-22, but they are needed in some strategic places, especially at the entrances to the park. And that's a combination of DPW and Rec and Parks responsibility.
And Jamie, you've had your hand up for a while. You should be unmuted or unmutable.
Hi, thank you for this presentation. This is great.
Sure.
I live in Waverly. I'm Jamie, and I was wondering if I really appreciate the consideration for the dog area, and that's what I'm advocating for today. And I was curious if this strategic plan can only make recommendations, what would be the best outlet to implement these ideas then, if it's not going to be through this strategic plan?
Yeah, I think the city's policy, Rec and Parks policies on dog runs and off-leash areas, they outline procedures of getting an interesting community group to spearhead the effort. They have a process, there's public meetings and so forth. So one of the things that we make sure with Rec and Parks are these, and we'll do this as part of the strategic plan, are these policies current, or is there an opportunity to update them? So updating them and getting those procedures as part of this will be critical. It's not going to happen overnight. So the strategic plan, what we can do is take all of the areas that have some feasibility of being considered for off-leash areas, and then identify what are the important considerations for each of these. For example, the plateau at Tudor Arms, it's very important that there's maintained some space for some of the community gatherings, that since it's visible from the street, that the fence, it's more of an ornamental fence and it, considers the visual impact. The site that was right below the University Parkway Bridge, it's more hidden. So that's going to have other considerations. It's going to be, that area might be impacted by the stream repairs that DPW is doing. So we'd identify all the things that need to be considered for that location and vice versa. So it's like, so that then groups that are, a group that is taking this forward and trying to get a resolution on a project has at least a roadmap to work from versus just starting from scratch.
Okay. Great. I think this came up in some of our sessions, but has there been discussion of closing Wyman Park Drive from Sisson to, I guess that's Remington? This was from Bruce. And Odette, I saw your hand just then, so I'll let Tom get through this one and I'll mute you, if that's okay. Yep.
That came up, I think that came up once in the survey, and then we heard that over the years and some, we have not been thinking of that as part of the strategic plan. There's not many east-west links. That's an important link. Our concern with shutting that off would be, that's a lot of visibility, eyes on the park from traffic going through there, connecting east and west. Would love to see that more of a complete street that's friendlier for pedestrians and bikes, but also for cars. So but we have not really been looking at that, closing that off at this point.
Yep, and there's been a lot of chat between Nellie and others about, all of that connectivity at the bottom of the park. I don't think there's any one question there. There's just a lot of chat and interest in that in general. So that'll all be.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many unknowns in that area. I mean, there could, if any of those properties change, there could be some incredible opportunities to strengthen the link between Stony Run and the Jones Falls. And so, but, again, they're all, private properties or, Boy Scouts, DPW. So the most we can hope, what we'd like to do is put forth some recommendations that if those properties do change, what are some things that, might be considered, especially any public properties like the DPW property, the Boy Scout property, if that is public property. How can some parameters be put on those properties when they change to strengthen the connections?
Councilwoman Ramos, I think you're unmuted. Yep, please.
I just wanted to add one last thing on the unleashed dog issue. Tom, I also was at first like, what? Wait, this isn't going to solve the problem, the issue of unleashed dogs. But I understand it's sort of to come up with some of the parameters, I guess, for the future conversation. The main issue is the enforcement of whatever we come up with. And that is something that can't come from the strategic plan. That has to come from, we getting more resources for animal control to be able to come down and do that. I mean, there's that I think is going to be and signage, is going to be really important as well. But yes, there has to be, I've had one public meeting and got distracted because there's a lot of other stuff going on, but we do need to have more conversations about it, but we can also dovetail the two conversations.
Yeah, I want to make sure that we kind of dovetail and pull this all together, that there's not separate tracks going on. One thing that will be important to note in the strategic plan is we can talk about all these, like, especially if there's a desire for policy changes, we could, identify that as a desire, but we can't make any recommendations in the plan that go against current laws. Right now the city has leash laws, so we can't say in the plan, don't enforce the leash laws or anything like that, because that's the law. So the plan needs to be adopted by the city. We can say, give consideration to changing the current leash laws or adding more, fine tuning them and so forth. But it's a complicated issue, as everyone knows who's been involved in the process, and very divergent, opinions on the matter. The ideal is that we get the park that, the park works for all users, that there is a place for off-leash dogs. There is a place that, families and children stay safe. And what we want to do is identify where are those opportunities and how might they be developed.
Okay. Luke, I'm going to unmute you. I think you had a question about some of the survey results slides. So I'm going to find you there. Yep. You should be getting a prompt to unmute. There you go.
Yeah, I just was wondering if Tom could tab back to some of the survey results slides. I mean, this picture is a nice picture, but I think it really helps us kind of frame our questions when we see some of those.
Yeah. And if anyone needs me to flip back to anything, just say
some of the very beginning ones, like, yeah. Let's see. Forward a couple more, and one more, and one more. Okay, maybe one more.
Okay.
I was mainly thinking about the ones that were talking about locations of usage and most important goals.
Okay, so this is, these are the locations that people most often visit. So that's this one. And then this is activities. And then what you most appreciate.
Yes. Yeah, this one.
This one you want?
I just wanted to stare at it for a while. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and again, all these slides, the whole survey, all these slides and the written comments will be online too. So it'll be available for you to spend more time looking at and dissecting. And again, it's, the survey is one method of input. It's not the end. This is not voting, but it does, it helps us to see that, among other things, the walking path and the natural environment is very important to folks. And that came across in several different questions.
Okay, I don't think I had any more questions in the chat, and I don't see any other hands, but we're approaching 8:30. Please raise your hands in here if you have another question, or if,
And I do see a lot of people saying they'd like to be involved in the discussion group.
I noted all of that, and of course we'll have the recording as well, or the transcript as well. But I think I got everybody's email that I believe they were all expressing interest in the the dog user group there. Yep.
Great. And then Councilwoman, I'll try and coordinate with you how we can dovetail these efforts, if she's still on. All right, well, thank you all very much. Appreciate it. I know it was a lot of download of information. Appreciate all the input and comments. So, it's even great on the website. We've had several people identify an email that they'd like to volunteer and be involved in helping out, because it really is heavily dependent, improving this space and keeping it as is even depends heavily on volunteers. And kudos to Amy for spearheading and leading the Friends of Stony Run.
And thank you all for joining us tonight, and we look forward to the follow-up and the third and final public meeting that'll take place in June. But most of all, check out all these presentations that'll be posted on the website. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I saw that. Actually, Luke, if you're still want to hang on for a second, yeah, you're still there. There was one more that just came in, Tom, about a comment you had about DPW redoing the stream restoration below University Avenue.
I'm sorry, what was that?
There was, did you say, or was this a mishearing, that DPW will redo the stream restoration below University Avenue?
Yes, that's correct. I wouldn't say, let me pull to that slide.
Not,
It's not redo, there's repairs to it. That is been, ever since the railroad went in, the section of stream was straightened out. So, in talking to other folks I know that do stream restoration, this is a very difficult section to address. And we know that there's been a lot of failure in there, so they'll be doing repair. I don't know what the extent is. I think when we met with them last week, it's might be another year before they initiate the design of that. So they don't even have a design team on board for that. So, but it will be happening. And so at this point, we don't have an understanding of what the scope of that is, how extensive it will be, but we want to make sure this is on our radar so we don't miss out on any opportunities to leverage that effort with other things.
thank you all.
Thank you. All right, Jonathan, thank you for
Yeah.
moderating.
Thank you, Jonathan.
I'll just see us out to the end here or just turn it off. I think it'll just end for everybody. Sandy and Tom, I'll get the notes and the recording and everything put together and get that out to all of us.
Okay, great. And then I'll look
Great
at the,
job.
Great job,
Tom.
everybody.
Tom, that was
Yes.
Yeah, it's all done, everybody.
Great
Very
job,
good.
Jonathan, Tom. Thank you. Bye.
Hi, James.
oh,
Say
Megan,
see
thank
ya.
you for all the graphics and your work with putting the
Oh, yeah.
survey
Great
together.
graphics.
Always a blast. Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Yeah.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.